So the next thing we want to do is start entering the field names for our table. There are a few guidelines that we need to keep in mind when creating fields within our table. Firstly, our field names can start with any letter at all. They do not have to begin with a Z or a Y like our table names themselves. The field names can have a maximum of 16 characters. Our tables must have at least one key field. This is used later on for searching and sorting of data, and they identify each record as being a unique record. You can assign an initial value to a field. Let's say in our example we add an employee class. Let's say the majority of our employees are going to be regular staff. So let's say we have an initial value of S for staff, but we do have some employees that are directors. Maybe they have a code of D. So we can say our initial value would always be an S, but allow the user to change the value to a D later on. Every field that we use in our table is made up of what we call a data element. And the data element defines specific attributes of each field. One word of warning here, data elements must adhere to the customer namespace again. So they must, for anything new that we create, begin with the letter Z or Y. So let's start off with entering our first field. And the field we're going to create is a very important field within an SAP system. It's the field that identifies the client that our records are associated with. So in the field name, enter client. And the data element, we will enter MANDT. Now the data element already exists in the system. And when I press enter after entering it, you can see the system automatically filled in the data type, the length, number of decimals, short text for the actual data element itself. Now very important, we need to ensure that the client field is made a key field within our table. The next field we're going to enter is going to be our own created field. And this is going to be employee. Again, we're going to make this field a key field. And we're going to use a brand new data element called ZEENUM. Once you have done this, click the Save button. I always like to save the table as we go along. Now the next thing is ZEENUM does not exist, so we have to create the data element. So even though it's let us enter it here, if we try to activate the table or just check the table, we should see an error message, and we do. So basically, because we haven't got a data element called ZEENUM already existing in the system, it's telling us we cannot activate this table and use it within our system. So press F3 or the back button. And then we're going to use forward navigation to create the data element. Another way of doing it is to open up a brand new session. Go to SE11 again. And start creating the individual objects this way. But we don't want to do that. We want to use forward navigation. And we do this just by double-clicking our brand new data element. So we get this window that appears called Create Data Elements. And it's telling us the element does not exist. Do we want to create it? Answer yes. Then we get taken to the Maintain Data Element window. Similar to the first screen that we saw when we created our table, the data element window is asking us for some short text. So let's enter in here employee data element. Under the short text, you can see 4 tabs, and the one that's highlighted says data type. We can see here the elementary data type, called the domain, needs to be defined for our data element. Now this is important. Domains must adhere to the customer namespace. And we are going to create a brand new domain using the same name that we use for the data element. Now don't get confused. This doesn't mean there's some sort of magical relationship between the names. There isn't. We're just using the same name because that's what I've decided. So enter ZEENUM, and once again we're going to use forward navigation to create the domain. So double click the entry. It's telling us our data element has changed, and do we want to save it before creating our domain? Choose yes. We get the Create Object Directory entry window appearing again, and just as before, we want to save this development to the $temp development class. So you can either just click the Save button or just click the Local Object button. So now, because we've used forward navigation, it's telling us that the new domain we are trying to create does not exist. Choose Yes to create the domain. And once again, enter some short text that describes what the domain is going to be used for. So we will just enter employee domain. Under the short text, we can see 3 tabs, and the one that's highlighted says Definitions. The fields available to us, the first one says Data Type. Click the drop down on Data Type. You will see lots of generic data types already exist within the ABAP dictionary, and we can use one of these for our employee field or domain. We're going to choose numC, which is a character string with only digits. So double click the entry, and that fills in the data type field for us. In the number of characters, enter 8, which means this field is going to contain a maximum of 8 characters. And we want zeros for decimals, which is the default anyway for a numC field. Select an output length of 8, and just hit the Enter key. We can see here that where we have entered the numC, it has brought back the description of this field, which tells us it's a valid entry. And the next thing we want to do is just take a quick peek at the Value Range tab. Now this tab is all about setting valid value ranges for the domain that you are creating. If you set a value range and a user enters a value in a field outside the valid value range that you set up, they will be shown an error message and be requested to enter a valid entry. Now there are 3 options for the value range. The first we can see says single values, and this is where you actually enter a list of individual valid values that a user can enter. The next is intervals. So if you have quite a lot of values, but they're all related or all in a sequence, you can enter the lower limit and upper limit. For example, a lower limit of 1, an upper limit of 9. And that saves you entering 9 individual single values. A user can only enter a value that falls within the ranges that you specify. The last option you have is Value Table. When you have a large number of possible entries, it's quite common to use a value table instead of a value range or list of single values. With a value table, you specify a complete valid value table entry list. But please note that if you use this option, you must also introduce foreign keys to your table to ensure the user's entries are tested against the values stored in the value table that you create. We don't need to enter any value ranges for this domain, so all we need to do is click the Save button. Once again, we are presented with the Object Directory Entry pop-up box, and we want to assign this object as a local object. So click the Local Object button. Now the next thing we want to do is activate this object. Even though we have saved it, it doesn't mean we can actively use it within our table yet. We need to set the object as active, which means our other data elements can actually use this domain going forward. So on the toolbar you'll see a little matchstick icon. If you hover over, it says Activate. And you can also press the Ctrl and F3 key. Click the Activate button, and then you're presented with a pop-up box which lists 3 different objects that are currently inactive. You can, if you wish, try and activate all the objects together, but I strongly advise you do not do this. When you are working in a typical development environment, you have got a number of other people creating developments all the time, and it's quite often you will see their objects appearing in this list, or maybe you've got a number of development projects on the go for yourself, and you could see inactive objects that you've created yourself in other projects that you don't want to activate just yet. So for now, we only want to activate the domain. So our top entry, object type DOMA, we can see ZEENUM. It is highlighted at the moment, so all we need to do is click the green tick. The system goes away, checks all the entries we have made for the domain itself, and if everything is okay, it will then activate the object. And if you look at the status bar at the bottom of the screen, everything's okay, so we can now proceed on with creating our table. Now remember, we used forward navigation for generating our domain. So all we need to do is step back. So click the F3 key, and you are taken back to your data element maintenance screen. Now because we have created and activated our domain, we can now see the text for our domain has actually come through and been placed beside the ZEENUM entry that we entered before. And it has brought back the individual domain properties that we created. Now the next thing we need to do is define the field labels. So click on the Field Labels tab, and here we need to define the short, medium, long and heading field labels for our data element. Now a little shortcut here, we've already entered the short text, so if you highlight that and use your Ctrl-C key to copy the entry to the clipboard, then you can come down to each individual field label and just paste it in one at a time. Now we can see for the short field name, our employee data element does not fit into the field label, so then just go ahead and tailor it so it all makes sense. Now remember, the field labels that we enter here are going to appear as field labels on our table. So we don't actually want it to say data element. We just want it to say employee or employee number. So in this case, I'm going to choose employee N, employee number, and copy that to the remaining field labels. Now you'll see on the left hand side there's a length field which I have on purpose not filled in, because once you put the entries in the field label, then press the enter key, it will automatically calculate the length of the entries that you have typed in. Once this is complete, save the data element and then activate it. Again, we get a window showing the inactive objects. This time we're only left with 2 objects. And remember, we only want to activate the object we are working on right now. So highlighted, we can see object type DTEL, which is the data element. So just click the tick button. And if everything works out okay, the status bar at the bottom of your screen will show objects activated. Now again, we used forward navigation from our table to create our domain. So all we need to do is press the F3 key or press the back button, and we step back to our table maintenance screen. And you can see right now the employee field that we were creating and the data element entry that we keyed in has got the appropriate data type, length, decimals, and short text brought back into our grid to indicate everything is working okay. Now we have just gone through the sequence of creating a data element and domain that we then use for our field. We are going to use the exact same practice for creating 4 additional fields. But the next field we want to create is the surname field. So key in surname. We don't want to make this a key field. On the data element, let's create an element called Z surname. We'll use forward navigation, so double click on Z surname. Choose yes to save the table. Choose yes to create Z surname as a data element. Key in the short text. I will just key in surname, data element. We will create a brand new domain. And we'll use forward navigation again. So double click Z surname. Choose yes to save the data element. Assign it to the local object. Choose yes to create the domain. And then key in some short text. We're going to choose a data type of character this time. So it's the second one. So use the drop down, bring up the data types in the ABAP dictionary drop down box. Choose char, which is a character string. We want to set the number of characters to 40 and output length to 40 as well. Hit the enter key to make sure everything is okay. Then choose the activate button. Now notice I haven't clicked the save button first, because when we click the activate button, it will save the object for us. Again, choose the $temp development class. Choose the object that we want to activate, which is a surname domain. And check the status bar to make sure everything is activated correctly. And if it has, then press the F3 key or hit the back button to go back to the data element. Make sure the domain attributes have come through, which they have here. We can see surname, character, length of 40. Go to the field labels tab. I'm going to enter surname into every single field label. Click enter or press enter. The length is automatically filled. Then activate your data element. Your data element will be selected in the inactive objects window again, so just click the continue button. Then check the status bar along the bottom to make sure everything has activated correctly. In this case it has. So again we'll press the F3 key to step back. And we can see the surname data element and domain attributes have been brought through into our table entry. The next field we want to create is forename. And we'll choose Z forename for our data element. Double click the data element. to create the object. Click Yes to save the table. Yes to create the data element. Enter some short text for the full-name data element. In this case, I'm choosing full-name data element. For the domain, enter Z full-name. Double-click the domain. Choose Yes to save the data element. Assign it to the local object development class. Choose Yes to create the domain. Enter some short text for the domain. Then, similar to the surname field we created, we're going to choose a character data type, CHAR, with a length of 40 and an output length of 40. Now activate the object. Assign it to the local development class. Make sure your object is selected in the inactive objects window and choose the Continue button to activate the domain. And when activated successfully, press the back button to go back to the data element. Ensure the domain properties have come through, which they have in this case, and now go onto the field label, and I'm going to enter the word full-name into all 4 field labels. Press Enter to automatically fill in the length of each field label, and then click the Activate button. Select your data element in the Inactive Objects window and click the Continue button. Check the status bar. Everything's been activated successfully, so press the F3 key to step back to see our table. And again, we see the data element and domain properties have come through for this field, so we know everything is working correctly. The next field we're going to enter is one called Title. We'll create a data element called ZTitle. Double-click the data element using forward navigation to create it. Choose Yes to save the table, Yes to create the data element. Enter some short text for the title. I'm choosing Title Data Element. In the domain, again create a brand new domain, call it ZTitle. Double click it, using forward navigation to create it. Choose Yes to save the data element. Assign it to the local object. Yes to create the domain. Fill in the short text. I'll enter the word title. In data type, we want to use character string again, but this time choose a length of 15 and an output length of 15 also. Activate the domain. Assign it to the local development class. Ensure your domain is highlighted in the Inactive Objects window. Click the Continue button. Once everything is activated, press the F3 key to step back to the data element. Click on the field label and enter the word title. To each field label, press Enter to automatically fill the length of each field label field, and activate your data element. Once again, select the object in the Inactive Objects window and click the Continue button. Once everything is activated successfully, press the F3 key to step back. to view your table. The last final field that we're going to create is date of birth. So I'm going to key in DOB for the field. I will create data element ZDOB. Use forward navigation to create it. Saving the table along the way and choosing yes to create data element. Enter date of birth data element for the short text. For the domain, once again, enter ZDOB and use forward navigation to create the domain. Choose yes to save the data element. Assign it to the local object. Choose yes to create the domain. Enter some short text. I will enter date of birth. Now for the data type, date of birth is a date field. So we want to choose the appropriate date field from the drop-down box. So press the F4 key to bring up the drop-down box and choose the entry that says DATS. I press the Enter key and you can see an information box has popped up just to tell us the attributes of the DATS field have been assigned to this domain. So just click the Continue box and it's filled in the number of characters for us and the output length. Now the output length is different to the number of characters because it will actually insert the backslash to separate the days, months and years of this field. So activate the object. Assign it to the local object development class. Ensure your domain is selected in the inactive objects window and choose Continue. Then check the status bar to ensure everything is activated and saved successfully. Press the F3 key to step back. And on your Data Elements field, go to Field Label. We will enter date of birth in every field, but the whole text date of birth does not fit in this short description, so I'm just going to key in DOB. Press Enter to automatically fill in the field label length, then activate your data element. Once the object has been activated and saved successfully, press the F3 key to step back. And there we can see all our fields have been entered into our table. All the short text and individual data element and domain properties have come through onto our screen. So that indicates everything is working just fine for us. Now the next thing we want to do is just click the Save button so we can just save our progress up to now. Then we're going to move on to maintain the technical settings for our table. Now SAP needs to know a little bit more information about the table that we are creating before it can create the back-end database tables itself. So you can either now click on the technical setting button on the toolbar, or go to the Go To menu and choose the technical settings option, which is Control-Shift F9. We now need to tell our system what development class we want to use. So if you click the drop-down button, you'll see that we have 5 options to choose from. And if you just read the descriptions, you'll get a flavor of what this is all about. We want to choose the first entry, which is APPL0, which identifies this table as holding master data in a transparent table. Double-click that entry, and then for the size category field, click the drop-down again. And here we are just estimating to the system itself how many records we are going to be holding in this table. And it will use these values to make an educated guess of how it should actually create the tables in the underlying database. We're not going to be holding a lot of data in our table, so just choose the first option, which is size category 0. Once selected, now we'll move down to the buffering options. And we want to ensure that buffering not allowed is selected. And what this means is basically do not load the table contents into memory for reading. And this prevents the table from being read in advance of us selecting the records in our programs. So you may be thinking it would be more advantageous to hold the data in memory for speed efficiency, and you'd be quite correct. But in our example, we don't actually need that. If speed was an issue for the development that you were working on, you would most definitely want to be using buffering switched on, which would ensure the data is read into memory. So if you have large tables that are being read very often, but only being updated infrequently, choose this option. That's all we need to fill out on this screen. So you can click the Save button and then press the back key. Now if all goes well, we can activate our table and move on to entering records. So click the little matchstick icon to activate your table and check the status bar at the bottom to ensure everything has worked successfully. In this case, it has. Now we have created our table, it's time to enter some data. So to be able to enter data into our table, go to the Utilities menu, go down to the Table Contents option, and select Create Entries. This will now take you to a data entry screen that has automatically been generated for us. Now before we enter some data, you'll notice the field names are the actual technical names of the field that we declared. For each field we entered some field labels, so I'll show you how to change the look of the screen so the field labels appear instead of the technical names. Go to the Settings menu and select User Parameters. Now this option allows you to tailor how tables look specifically for your user ID. Every user can do this, and what we want to do right here is say show us the field labels. So click the Field Labels radio button, then click the Continue key. Now you can see the field labels have come back just as we define them when creating the table. So now let's enter some records. So the employee number is an 8-character field, and we defined it as num-c, so it can only be numeric characters. So here I'll enter 1, lots of zeros and a 1. So I've entered the 5 fields, and I'm going to press the Enter key, and just watch what happens to the fields. Notice the surname, forename and title field have been changed to uppercase, and the system automatically validated every field to ensure we entered the correct values. So just click the Save button, check the status bar at the bottom, and you can see the record has successfully been saved. So what we're going to do now is just click the Reset button, and it will reset these fields back to their default values, and we'll enter our second record. Now this time with date of birth, I'm not going to enter the periods, I'll just enter the numeric value. So now when I press the Enter key, the system automatically validates all the fields and does any conversion that it needs to do. In this case, the date of birth field it put the correct format in for us. Click the Save button. Let's enter another record. Click the Save button. Enter 2 more. Oops, sorry, I didn't press the reset button, but never mind, I'll just overwrite. One more. Now, just here, I put the slash in. Let's see if it gives us an error. It does. You see, it tells us to enter the correct date format. If I take that out and press enter, it doesn't like it. There we go. It's accepted the data. I'll click the save key, and that's it. We've entered 5 records. So now we've entered data into our table, we'll do the last few steps in this module and view the data. So let's press the back key. And we're back to the database table creation screen. And to view our data, it's very simple. We'll go back to the Utilities menu, to the Table Contents, and choose Display. Now, whenever we view a table through SE11 or SE16, SAP automatically generates a selection screen for us. So if we don't want to view all the records initially, we can enter some filter values so that the system will only show us the records that we want to focus on. Now, in our case, we only entered 5 records, so there's no need to do that. But what you can do, if we did, is let's say we want to focus on one specific employee number. You can key it directly into here. Or key a range, the start and the end. But all we want to do is view all the records. So just click the Execute button or press F8. And there you can see all 5 records that we entered. If we had many more fields on the table, the screen would scroll to the right hand side, which means you wouldn't be able to see all the fields on the screen at the same time. But one thing you can do is either double click on the field and the screen will change to just focus on that one record. Alternatively, if you click the little check marks, here we'll select 3 records. You can then press the Choose button, which is F2, and the system will then allow you to cycle through the 3 records that you chose. So you see now we've got this little Next Entry button that's appeared. So if I click it, we go into the second record, then we can see a back and a forward. If we click it again, hopefully it'll show the 4th record we entered. There we go, the 4th one. Press back and back again to go to the start. Then to go back to the default view, the grid where it shows all our records, just press the back key. And we're back to where we started. Have a play around with the screen, because you'll notice there are other buttons that appear on the toolbar that will allow you to filter and sort the records however you wish. So as an example, if we wanted to sort this data in, let's say, alphabetical on forename, just click on the forename field and then click the Sort Ascending button. Now you can see it's reordered the records for us. There are lots of things you can do with this table view, and you'll find that over time it becomes a really useful tool when you want to check on the data within an SAP system without going to the actual transaction screens themselves. So that's it for this module. You've created a table from scratch. You've added fields, and with the fields you've added data elements and data domains. You've defined specific field labels for each field. You've ensured you've generated a key for your table and configured the necessary technical elements to ensure it can be saved in the backend database. After that, you entered some data and now you're viewing the results. In this module, we're going to focus specifically on the data dictionary. Now, the data dictionary is the main tool that we use to look at, understand and enhance the database and database tables that are used by our SAP system. We can view standard tables that are delivered by SAP using this tool. We can create our own tables, and we can even enhance the existing tables delivered by SAP with new fields. There are many other features involved in the data dictionary, but we are going to stick with the basic ones in this module so we can then build on our knowledge later on when we are creating our ABAP programs. So the first thing we're going to do is create a database table. And this will involve creating fields, data elements and domains. You'll get to learn what each one of these is and why they are necessary when building your tables. Whilst we are building the table, you'll become familiar with the tools to check your table for errors. Once your tables are error-free, we can then activate our tables so that they can be used within the system. We will then have a look at maintaining the technical settings of the table that we create that will allow us to enter data into our table. And lastly, we will take a look at the data that we have entered using some of the standard SAP transactions that are available to us in the SAP system. Let's move on and start creating our first table. So here we are with our SAP GUI open. And the first thing we're going to do is find the data dictionary in the SAP menu. So open up the Tools menu, choose the ABAP Workbench. Under Development, you'll then see SE11 for the ABAP dictionary. Double click it, and you'll then be presented with the first screen for the ABAP dictionary. So let's go through the different options that we see on the screen. The first one we see is Database Tables. This is where we can enter an existing table name, followed by a display to have a look at the technical components of the table. Then we have Views. A view is similar to a table, but all it is a table structure. It doesn't contain any data. Then we have Data Types. Data types are what can make up our database tables, and we'll have a look at those soon. We have Type Groups, Domains, Search Help, and Look Objects. Let's focus on creating a table first of all. So what we want to do is click on the Database Table option, and in this exercise we're going to focus on creating a transparent table. There are other types of tables, such as cluster tables and pool tables, but you don't need to know about those just now. All we want to do is create a transparent table. And when we create our table, we need to ensure our table name adheres to the customer-defined namespace. And this means we need to start our tables with the letter Z or the letter Y. Most commonly, you'll see the letter Z being used. So for our example, we're going to create a table that will list employees within a company. In the Database Tables field, enter Z Employees and click the Create button. This new screen appears and the cursor is on the short text field. All we need to do here is enter a description for our table. Just type in employees. Now under the short text you can see various tabs, and the one that's highlighted at the moment is the Delivery Maintenance tab. For the Delivery class, click on the field and click the drop down button. This shows you a list of delivery classes that you can choose for your table. Have a read through, but the one we want to choose is Application Table, because we're going to hold master data or transaction data in the table that we are creating. And in the Data Browser / Table View Maintenance field, click the drop down again and choose Display Maintenance Allowed. This will allow us later on to enter data directly into the table. And before we go any further, click the Save button. Now this window pops up, Create Object Directory Entry. Now what this is all about is any development we do within the SAP system. Quite often we do the development in our development environment, and we have to move the development through to our quality assurance environment and then through to production. And this window allows us to choose the development class, which has config behind it the actual transport route that we want to use for our development. But in our case, we're just running through this example scenario and we don't want to move our developments into another system. So all we need to do is click Local Object, and what will happen is you will see $temp appear as the development class. And that means to the system, this object is only to exist in our development environment and we do not wish to transport it any further. So click the Local Object button and we can see down at the status bar at the bottom of the screen, our table has been saved. Now if you go to the Go To menu and choose Object Directory Entry, we can then see the Change Object Directory Entry pop-up box, which is very similar to the previous one. We can see that the development class has been changed to $temp.